Hello, and if you weren't at class today, I missed you. I hope the band and orchestra and choir field trip was awesome and that you guys sung your little hearts out or played your little hearts out. Today in class, we covered section 1.3 in our Cells and Heredity book, which dealt with the chemical compounds of living things. As you remember, back to when we did the 6 characteristics of living things, chemicals of life is one of those 6 characteristics. So thinking about yesterday, the compounds and molecules we talked about, we're going to build on that. The first thing you need to know is that there are 2 types of compounds. We have organic compounds and inorganic compounds. Organic compounds are the ones that contain carbon. Inorganic compounds do not contain carbon. So when you go to the grocery store and you're looking to buy something that is organic, you are looking for something that contains carbon. So sometimes that's kind of funny. People pay more money for organic things, and really it's just signifying that something is containing carbon or that it was made with something that was carbon rich, which sometimes is other animal waste, if you're catching my drift. No. The other important thing that we talked about is that living things have 4 organic compounds, and we're going to talk about them in detail. They're carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And then there's really one inorganic compound that is important, and it is your water. So let's go ahead and talk about the first organic compound, which is going to be our carbohydrates. Carbohydrates can also be called carbs. So I'm going to use those 2 terms interchangeably, carbohydrates and carbs. They contain carbon, which remember yesterday we talked about chemical symbols. Chemical symbol for carbon is a C. So if you're doing your worksheet and you want to save a little bit of time, you can use C, H, and O, which would represent carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Examples of carbohydrates, like the ones we're most familiar with, deal with breads and pastas and sugars, and those are things we eat. But inside of our bodies, we also use carbohydrates, and those carbohydrates are cell walls. I had a typo there. Ignore cell membranes. The cell walls of the plants are what we use to gain energy. So the biggest perk of carbohydrates is that it will give you energy. 2 types of carbohydrates though. The first type is your simple carbohydrates. They are made of sugars. I love that alliteration. They're simple carbohydrates, they're sugars. They also taste sweet. The second is a complex carbohydrate. Complex carbohydrates tend to taste pretty bland. They're your starches, bread, pasta, other vegetables. The other cool thing about a carbohydrate is when you eat a simple carbohydrate, because it is simple, your body can break it down very, very quickly. When you eat a complex carbohydrate, it takes your body a while to work through that complexity and turn it into energy. So a simple carbohydrate is a very fast source of energy. A complex carbohydrate is a more slow burn energy. So athletes, if you want to run really, really fast, maybe you're a sprinter, eat some sugar. If you want to go distance, try some pasta. The next organic compound of living things is a lipid. Another word for a lipid, so a synonym, would be a fat. So again, I'll use these words interchangeably, fat and lipid. Lipids contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now wait a second. If you're paying attention, you'll notice that I had just said that our carbohydrates contained carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And how can they not be the same thing? I want you to think about it like a birthday cake. If you were to make a birthday cake and call it lipid, this is a plate, there's some candles. Okay, if you were to make this cake with some ingredients, it would taste pretty yummy. But then, let's say you put in some sugar, you put in some flour, but then if you were to make the exact same cake with scrambled eggs, the ingredients are the same, but the way that you processed them was differently. It's the same thing with a carbohydrate and a lipid. The ingredients, the elements are the same, But because you've done something differently to them when you bonded them, your appearance is going to be different. Examples of lipids that you're familiar with in your everyday life would include things like olive oil, lard, butter. And then where this says types, these are really more examples. Oils, waxes, and candles, creams that you may put on your hand. When we get into types of lipids, there are really two. There are your saturated fats and your unsaturated fats. An unsaturated fat, is going to be a liquid at room temperature, whereas a saturated fat is going to be a solid at room temperature. There's a lot of cool chemistry behind why this works. They're the exact same ingredients, the exact same structures, but one's a liquid and one's a fat, and why that is. But I'm going to save it for you for another day. If you're really curious, come up and ask me, or ask someone who was in class today. They also know. As far as your cells go, your lipids are essential because they make up your cell membranes. So when we get to our strawberry DNA extraction next week, it's going to be really important that we know how to break through the DNA in the strawberry. The first cellular layer we're going to come across is the membrane. Well, how would you break apart any other fat? If you had fat on a dish, what would you need to do? Well, you'd add soap. We're going to do the exact same thing. In order to get inside of the strawberry, we're going to add soap to it. Okay, so now we are on the third organic compound of living things. Have you been keeping track? So far we've had carbohydrates, we've had lipids, and now we're moving on to proteins. Your proteins are going to include carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and then sometimes we'll find sulfur in them. This makes sense to me because when you leave meat out, it starts to smell really bad, and sulfur naturally stinks. Examples of proteins. Birds use proteins to make their feathers. Spiders use proteins to make their webs. And of course, we know that protein builds muscle, and unfortunately or fortunately, your muscles are meat. Yuck. The other big takeaway is that sometimes proteins are not even a solid structure. Sometimes proteins are what we call an enzyme. An enzyme is an agent that speeds up a chemical reaction in a living thing. For example, the enzyme you're probably most familiar with is your saliva. When you put something in your mouth, hopefully you learned last year, if you have Miss Anderson, you did a lab with a cracker, and if you chew, whenever you put something in your mouth, those enzymes start to go to work. It's the first step of digestion. With a cracker, if you put a cracker in your mouth and you start chewing, first it tastes really bland, but then suddenly you know that it starts to taste pretty sweet. You're breaking apart that complex carbohydrate and showing that it's a sweet carbohydrate, going from complex to simple. Pretty cool. Enzymes are very, very important in living things. We have them in our lysosomes and our mitochondria. And hopefully you're thinking to yourself, I have them in my lysosomes because my lysosomes break things down. Remember, our enzymes are dealing with chemical reactions. At the same time, our mitochondria is taking foods and building energy. So again, chemical reactions. If a chemical reaction is occurring, you probably have an enzyme. Let me back up. If a chemical reaction is occurring in your body, you probably have an enzyme present, and in that case, you have a protein. So now we're on number 4. We have had our carbohydrates, we have had our lipids, which are also known as fats, we have had proteins, and last but not least are our nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are made up of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and our best examples are red meat, shellfish, mushrooms, and peas. Now, why do you think red meat? Well, a lot of your classmates today said because of the blood. But be cautious because there is no DNA in blood. No DNA in blood. None. It's kind of my favorite part of crime shows. You can watch and poke holes in the plot because they love to have blood. And then, oh my gosh, so-and-so did it. No, that would never happen. So there's no DNA in blood, but there is tons of DNA in all of your muscles. Remember when we did our cheek cell lab, we swabbed our cheeks and we were able to see the nucleus. If you can see the nucleus, you can see the chromatin inside of it and your nucleolus inside of it, and that's where all of your DNA is held. Unfortunately, red blood cells do not have a nucleus, thus no DNA. One more tidbit about the crime shows. If you're watching the crime show and they like pick up a cigarette butt or a can of soda that maybe somebody has been drinking, think about how when you drink, it touches that inside of your lip. Again, that's all we had to do for the cheek cells. I think it's kind of cool. Your nucleic acids form a double helix, which is kind of like a twisted ladder. Here's the picture of it. I'm drawing another one. Where the rungs of the ladder are all twisty. And on every piece of the ladder, it contains information about who you are and what you're going to be. This is really the basis as we start to look towards heredity and its nucleic acids. Speaking of it, you have to spell one word right all school year. That word is deoxyribonucleic. Say D. Say deoxy. Say deoxyribo. Say deoxyribonucleic. Okay, now say deoxyribonucleic acid. I love that it has that rhythm to it. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. The only word the whole year. Luckily, it's phonetic. The only piece that sometimes people struggle with is this nucleic part, but I know that you can do it. Hopefully this little video is helping you to get your worksheet done. If you have questions, I would be more than happy to meet with you before school on Monday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon. Bye.